with Sarah Maples. It's one of those times where I forgot to notify my babysitter that I can hear all of the screams of my children from the basement of my home. So happy Thanksgiving, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Again, I have Sarah Maples here to talk about our best war stories. So we launched a book club here at ClearanceJobs. We kicked it off with Why We Write about 7-8 months ago. Have been reading a book every month since. I feel like we're coming full circle as we head towards the end of the year because both of these books are through the same publishing company. They're similar in the sense they're highlighting a lot of veteran and military authors sharing their stories, poetry and prose. Specifically, the Our Best War Stories are prize-winning poetry and prose from the Colonel Darren L. Wright Memorial Award. So it had several years of stories. And Sarah, again, is a ClearanceJobs contributor right now, but also had one of the prize-winning poems that was in this anthology of stories. So again, thank you, Sarah, for taking the time to chat with us for a few minutes to talk about books and writing, why you write, and just to share a little bit more with us today. So thank you again for your time.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, and so I think I was surprised because I knew I'd seen your writing before. I'd seen your blog. I was familiar with your writing, and then I opened up Our Best War Stories, and you actually had a prize-winning poem in here. So am I the first person that was surprised by that? Is poetry kind of in your wheelhouse, or kind of explain how the poem came to be? And have you always written poetry, or was it just something you submitted to the contest specifically, or tell me more about that?
So I don't write a lot of poetry anymore, but poetry is sort of what kicked off my writing. Actually, in 8th grade, we had to read Summer of My German Soldier, and then we were supposed to find a poem in a book in the library that sort of encapsulated the messages in there, and I couldn't find one I liked, so I went to my 8th grade teacher and I said, can I just write one? And she said, I've never had anybody ask that before, but sure. And so that sort of kicked it off, and I started writing after that, and then became an intelligence officer, so then everything I wrote was classified. But then post-military, I started writing again, but not very much poetry. But this particular poem just seemed like something that had to be written.
Yeah, and it was definitely a very personal poem. I thought it kind of spoke to probably emotion, some of your experiences. Did you find like writing poetry to be specifically cathartic, maybe through your military experience? Were you writing poems as you served? Did you kind of write to decompress following maybe after a deployment, or was it just a process you were in as you were in serving? Or tell me more about that.
I think I probably have like 20 notebooks full of poems that I wrote. They're never going to be, seen the light of day, but they're sort of the space that I go to when I'm writing about something that's really, really emotionally charged that I can't seem to get out in full sentences. It seems to come out in poems. And Good Soldier, which is the one that's in the book, is one of those topics that just had to come out in a poem.
Or has a question about writing, or just a question they want to throw out, definitely post a comment here, and I can see those questions coming in, and we will respond and answer those. So yeah, and I know that I love this book because it's similar to Why We Write. It had but this focus was very specific on why service members sometimes choose to share those stories, kind of as you said, like very much an anthology of the process of writing for service members. And this is kind of the expression of a lot of that. So some, best war stories comes out in a lot of different formats, again, prose and also poetry. Can you maybe speak to, was there another submission here in the book that you recall that, that really spoke to you?
There are so many.
It's like,
I can't pick one, but they're they span such a scope between Vietnam and the current wars, and so you get such a different perspective. And of course, like even those of us who I deployed to Saudi Arabia for the start of the Iraq War, and then I went to Afghanistan for 6 months, and even those of us who have both or multiple people have that same experience, the viewpoints are so different. I mean, we have individuals who are Marines and Army infantry. I was an Air Force intelligence officer. My perspective of the war was so different. So for me, just reading everybody else's stories and how they express their war experience is just a new thing for me, even though I was there and experienced it myself.
Yeah, and I think that's something for me. I start to feel like a narcissistic millennial, which is not at all who I am, and I'm even barely a millennial. But I think about war in the context of kind of the post 9/11. And so when I opened the cover of this, I think you kind of have a picture in your head of what the veteran story is going to be, and it's very focused on Iraq, Afghanistan, but that is what, like, reading an anthology and kind of seeing what different submissions came in is the intergenerational aspect. And also too, that like even a post 9/11 veteran isn't encapsulated in a certain demographic. You have service members that, and even the story of Colonel Darren Wright and his kind of story of service and how the contest got started. I just, every time you hear a story of service, I feel like it's very inspiring and interesting. And that's what I liked about the book, is the same thing, that you have a lot of different stories, and it kind of takes your mindset out of this whole notion that the only veterans are post 9/11 veterans and the only military stories are about Iraq and Afghanistan, because I didn't count, although I meant to, because you really had, it seemed like it almost jogged back and forth pretty quickly between those different perspectives. So I know you're kind of a part of this military writing community. So maybe even speak to that as folks who are engaging online, or sharing on blogs or writing in different places. How do those intergenerational aspects kind of come into it? What have you learned from other folks who have maybe previously written, or other folks that you maybe even met through the writing contest here, or other things? What have you kind of learned from the intergenerational writers within the military community?
So I think everybody is really supportive. I mean, and you have sort of the names that everybody knows, the Elliot Ackerman and Phil Clay and Matt Gallagher, and then you've got a bunch of other individuals who are writing. You've got Jerry Bell, and you've got Randy Brown, and Chris Lake, and all of these individuals who are helping their fellow veterans bring their stories out and giving them venues for doing that. I mean, Chris Lake and Randy Brown, who really drove the publication of Our Best War Stories, are two of the most supportive individuals in the community. And I love that. Everybody's so welcoming. And one of the things as a woman veteran that I really love is that they're super supportive of making sure that women are included in the storytelling, and that we get to lend our voices to the narrative around what war is like for all generations and individuals. And there's no you weren't infantry or you weren't whatever, so your story doesn't count, and that really matters.
Yeah, no, I feel like there's been, I feel like getting out of this community is the diversity of what a military experience looks like. And again, if you try to have one thought about it in your head, it's probably a stereotype, honestly. If you think veteran or service member and the only thing that comes to mind is XYZ, then you probably pulled that from a movie and not from actually talking to people in service. So again, all the diversity of, stories and experiences, and even just engaging, with folks that are in the military community. And so I did want to do a shout out right now. So as we're, in the middle of this chat, so Leidos has been working with ClearanceJobs throughout the month of November, as we've been working on trying to get veterans to share their stories. So today is technically the last day. So if you're listening on here and you're a service member or a veteran, if you share the story of how you got a job post-military or something about your employment journey, we have an article. Katie will post a link to it here. In the chat here on our Facebook Live. If you share your story, we still have the chance to win $100 gift cards to veterans who are sharing their stories. And so we want folks to do that. And again, we thank Leidos for working with us this month. If you're looking for a cleared job, Leidos has literally thousands of job openings for veterans and service members who are interested in engaging. And they're one of those, it starts to sound trite to say it, but employers do care about hiring veterans and finding a place for them. And talking to the folks that we've interacted with there and their recruiters, is they have that desire. So you can engage with the recruiter there. If you have questions, connect with those recruiters on ClearanceJobs. They are here. I think there are jets taking off in my house behind me. I don't know if everyone else can hear it, but welcome to 2020, people. This is a professional interview, and there's a lot of noise in the background of my house. I did not put up the right sign, Sarah. I apologize.
No, the Navy isn't flying over my house today, but they usually are here. Yes. I love it. I love jet noise.
So again, we're talking about Our Best War Stories. So we connected with you, Sarah, actually following your blog after the DD 214. So kind of as a segue to that, kind of what launched or prompted you to launch that site and get you writing through that platform as well?
Yeah, so I started that in 2013 after I'd spent 2 years working with student veterans at a college, and I realized that there was so much that was complicated about using VA education benefits, and that there were all these other factors, homelessness and mental health issues and all these other things that were impacting the education of veterans, and that I had spent 2 years really helping my student vets through. And I thought they can't be the only ones who are struggling with this. So I started after the DD 214 to address a lot of those issues and help sort of crack the code on how do you get out of the military and become a productive and happy civilian. So that's what I do there.
How do you do it, Sarah?
It's complicated. It never stops. It never stops. You gotta embrace it. But there are plenty of steps. I work with a lot of vets one-on-one to try to make that process easier.
Okay. Well, and that's a good point. It is a one-on-one process. I do feel like, again, like we said, veterans aren't one size fits all. And so I think sometimes I could be generalizing here, but standardizing kind of advice or saying like, hey, if you're a veteran, you're a perfect fit for XYZ job. That's not necessarily the case because everybody comes out depending on their experience or background with a diverse realm of skills. So sometimes if you're looking to check that like veteran employment box, that's sometimes the problem I see is like, hey, I'm a veteran. I just want a veteran job, quote unquote. But you really have to tailor it and find a mentor, find somebody who can help you in your career journey and get experience doing different things and help you translate. The skills translation, I think, is also really big too. We talk a ton about that at ClearanceJobs.
Yes, and I'm not a big fan of the word translate, even though I know what it means, but I think it gets the wrong mindset for veterans actually. Instead of getting them to embrace the job search and actually do their homework on what it means to work for Leidos or what it means to work for ClearanceJobs or what that looks like, they start just immediately trying to take their skills and put them on a resume, and it just doesn't work. And as I wrote for you guys, they start carpet bombing. And that's not as effective as it could be. So yeah.
Yeah. No, it's the rifle gun approach is a better approach to finding a job post-military versus, just the whole cost. So it's hard to get those words out of your vocabulary though, Sarah. So it's yes. Tough when you're used to saying certain things. And somebody else had commented earlier, and so I don't want to miss that. If it's easier to get a clearance if you are a veteran. So we get questions like that a ton at ClearanceJobs. A lot of veterans come out with a security clearance, but especially now with them trying to downgrade security clearances, we're getting more instances of veterans who come out and don't necessarily have an active clearance. So what I always say is, obviously, if you've served in the military, you are very clearable. You've passed some suitability criteria just to serve within the military community. So even if you don't have an active clearance, you can certainly sell your clearability. It's not necessarily easier per se to get a clearance. You might go through, you're going to go through pretty much a similar process, but having a clearance is certainly an asset. Can you speak to that at all, Sarah? Like, so having a clearance versus not having a clearance, or other skills, maybe veteran skills that you think really set folks apart that they should make sure that they're highlighting as they transition?
Oh, so many. It really depends on what field they go into, but like I was an intelligence officer and I actually let my clearance lapse. But I still used a lot of the skills that I had learned as an intelligence officer in the various jobs that I had done, the analysis, being able to look at trends, to take a lot of data and put it into one space. But I think some of the things that veterans do really well are manage risk, and figuring out how to manage both down and up, and being able to take a lot of information and figure out what's actually relevant and what isn't, and decide on a path forward. So I think those are just a few of the skills, but each career field is going to be different, as well as each job. So everybody should be tailoring what skills they're highlighting on their resume to whichever job they are actually applying to. And they find that out based on the job description.
So read the job description before you apply. And that's also on recruiters and companies too, because this is a pet peeve of ours at ClearanceJobs. There are a lot of terrible job descriptions out there that don't quantify what folks are actually looking for. That's why, even though we're clearance jobs, we say like the networking piece of it is probably the biggest piece of finding a job. The hidden job market is huge. And so actually knowing somebody at a company. So it's a benefit of clearance jobs. For every job posted, you can see the recruiters behind that job listing. So you have a person to connect with, and you can connect with them as you apply. And I certainly say, like, I would not be applying for a position without connecting with a recruiter as well. Is that something you can speak to at all? Like connecting with a recruiter as you apply?
Well, I mean, connect with as many people as possible. I mean, I've gotten jobs because I talked to somebody in a lunchroom. I've gotten jobs because somebody else took my resume and passed it on and set up an interview for me. So, I mean, the thing is, people are the ones who have opportunities, and it's a lot more effective to actually make those connections, especially before you need the job, but certainly during the job search, as opposed to just trying to send your resume into the black hole that is the online application system.
Yeah, no, I think that the knowing somebody is key, and also just paying attention to what you're putting out there as a person and as a brand. So I got my job off of Twitter, which is scary now to think about. I'm gonna have to hide that from my children someday because it's getting more and more scandalous. I got a Twitter job, and I picked up Katie Keller, editorial communications. I was just thinking about this. I picked her up at a hotel lobby. That's not weird. Katie, can I out our story here? But also found her and connect with her on LinkedIn. But she wasn't afraid to make a connection with somebody and say, like, because that in-person connection, even as things move online, I think having some form of connection and figuring out how to make those connections well virtually, whether it's a live chat with somebody or FaceTime. Sarah, I feel more connected to you already. I'm sure you feel more connected to me and whatever the heck goes on in my basement while I'm working after
Absolutely.
after the call today. Well, again, we are talking about our best war stories and writing. And so with Clearance Jobs, we did send this book out to probably about a half dozen folks who requested a copy, and we sent the digital and ebook versions to folks. And what I found, a couple folks reached out, and I don't know if this is because of Randy's network. They have the college network. A few folks who said they were interested in using it as a part of curriculum in writing classes and sharing those stories. So can maybe, I feel like as somebody who's written and contributed, maybe even speak to that, like reading these stories, why do you think maybe that's useful even for the next generation? Somebody sitting there kind of trying to learn their craft or learn writing or learn how to process. Maybe why is reading some of how veterans and service members have done that potentially helpful for other folks who are writing as well?
Oh, so many reasons. I mean, just from the demographics, I mean, less than 1% of the U.S. military population serves in the United States military, and so most people aren't exposed to the experiences. And so having someone in a creative writing class who has to also read material written by veterans exposes them to something that in a lot of cases they might not have been exposed to. Also, veterans are often confronted with some really traumatic material that they have to process. And so by reading their writing, you're getting some really in-depth emotional writing that you can connect with. But also when I worked at the college, I got a lot of stereotypes about veterans. Oh, they can't think for themselves, or, you know, whatever the case was. And having more curriculum that includes veterans in the conversation can help really attack some of those stereotypes.
No, I think for sure. I think you make a great point too, because I feel like even now, I'm going to out myself also as an international affairs major, which that's like international affairs. What's global affairs? Who cares about the world? But I feel like over the past few years, there has been like this kind of, there are still are there people deployed? Do we have a special forces? Do we have service members deployed? I don't know if you feel that disconnect, but I do feel like there are some people that making, just not to make generalizations, but have forgotten that we still have a military. Because no, just me.
No, I agree. Or they don't really know, they don't really understand what we do. I mean, a lot of times we see people and you're all about war. I'm like, do you have any idea the amount of humanitarian work that military does? Like, we're the first one on the scene after a tsunami or an earthquake. We do so much related to diplomacy. I mean, there's so much more to it than just what happens on a battlefield. And there are a lot of people who are just disconnected from that. So I think certainly something like Our Best War Stories is a way to help connect and see that there's so much more beyond that.
Awesome. We brought it full circle, Sarah. So with that, Katie did have a request that, of course, we should read some of your poem.
Oh, geez.
Would you like to read some?
Oh, man.
I will.
Let me find it. Yeah, hold on.
It's on page 151.
Okay.
I feel like I could read it for you, but it wouldn't be the same. I thought maybe you had it memorized, Sarah.
No. So I had this thing about when I read something or I write something, I try not to go back and read it or view it again. So I try not to listen to podcasts about it, things like that. I don't. But okay. So it's called Good Soldier. It says, and stop me when I've read enough. You have to call them sir. You have to call them sir when they order you to drop and give them 20. When they tell the men not to be pussies. When they yell, hey, female. You have to call them sir when they put you on duty for the 5th weekend in a row. When they refuse to look you in the eye. When they believe you can't do it because you're a woman. You have to call them sir when they call you a disgrace because you have tits in uniform. When they snicker about how you're a bitch, a slut, a dyke. When they say no one is going to rescue a fat girl from the battlefield. You have to call them sir when they promise to be discreet if you can ignore their wives. When they're drunk and they say, don't tell. When you report it, but they don't want to ruin his career. You have to call them sir. Only you don't have to call them sir. You only think you do.
Wow, Sarah, that was a powerful moment right there.
Woo, sorry, I wasn't prepared to have to read that.
Katie called us out. I mean, it's worth commenting. So this is a topic that is kind of near and dear to my heart a little bit. Has a former Army PAO, so we obviously covered. I feel like we've made huge inroads. Again, this could be a generalization, in just talking about sexual assault in the military, talking about gender discrimination in the military. I feel like it's a conversation, like you said. I feel like there's a lot of men and women engaged in the dialogue now, which is definitely a huge step forward. But obviously, it's your poem. I don't want to put words in your mouth. Maybe as an Air Force veteran, have you kind of seen that dynamic? Even writing this poem, response to it, was it rough? Did you get some negative feedback or?
No, I haven't gotten any negative feedback except from my mother. But most people have actually commented that it's very powerful and that it really puts into perspective. A lot of male veterans have said, I didn't see this and I didn't understand it, but I appreciate you showing me what it was like. And, this isn't just my experience. This is a summary of the experiences of a lot of women who served. And it's still, we are making significant progress, but I think it's still 1 in 4 women who come out of the military having military sexual trauma. So there's still a long way to go as a society as a whole, as well as in the military. But I agree with you that there's a lot more open conversation happening about gender bias, about discrimination, about sexual harassment and sexual assault than there was certainly when I served.
Yeah. And that's progress, and continue to acknowledge that things, need to be said and steps need to be taken. I feel like, and the words that you referenced and heard, I think when you get caught in a vacuum, and this can happen organizationally too, like toxic workplace culture, it happens when you don't have truth speaking to power in those situations. And so that can happen in a workplace, any workplace, and it certainly can happen in the military, where you have, maybe norms that perpetuate, and you need somebody to break in and be like, hey, actually, that is offensive when you speak about it. You might not have. And what I find sometimes, like, I don't think sometimes people actually realize. Dear, was that ever your experience? Like, people don't.
Oh yeah.
People don't.
I'll give you an example. When I was a brand new lieutenant, my first commander offered to move me to a different unit if I would date him. And I was a brand new lieutenant. I was an 01 and he was an 05. And I actually went to my boss, who was an 03, and I said, look, I really don't want you to tell anybody, because it's not going to go well for me if you tell people, but I want you to know in case this becomes an issue. It's not a huge issue now, but it could be. And he actually didn't listen to me, and he told some other people, and very quickly I was the problem. I was the issue, even though I was the brand new lieutenant and hadn't done anything except show up at the unit. And so, you know, years later I saw him and he said, I really didn't understand. I wish I could take that back and do what you had asked, because I didn't understand what you were talking about with how much it would come back on you, even though it wasn't you who did that. So, so yeah, I think talking about it certainly makes a difference, but we're still in a situation where there are too many people who don't handle it properly. So
Yeah.
I won't say any more about that.
Getting the right accountability is key. And hopefully folks have, you know, because I do, like, if in a vacuum and without truth and honesty and without sharing things, you know, and you do need to feel like if something makes you uncomfortable, there needs to be a safe way to report it that, like you said, doesn't result in backlash. Because, like, say, sometimes it you know, discretion, like, hey, I want to be able to report this without the negative, you know, without it negatively impacting me down the road, just because, yeah, this could be affecting somebody else too. You're, like, you know, saving a future story and clarification. So that's, yeah, that's big. Yeah. And then, and Bassman 42, we are still in Iraq and Afghanistan. So wanted to make a note. Service members are deployed. It was Thanksgiving last week, so we had to have to make a note. People are still serving, and we appreciate their service. And a lot of progress has been made in the military, but it takes folks like you, Sarah, sharing your stories and being upfront and talking about things, and then also, you know, just taking the time to write them. Because I hope somebody else reads that and is like, you know what, if that was my experience, or yeah, if I'm using that kind of language, and maybe I should just rethink the context of how I'm using my words. Words have power. And so I think it is worth just considering, you know, and it might not seem, you know, like I say, I think depending on the context and community, I do think sometimes people just don't even think or realize what their words mean, or realize the positions of authority and how much that matters. And especially in the military chain of command structure, how you might say something to a peer, but if you are in a military chain of command structure and you say something, it's a different ball game entirely. And so, yeah.
Absolutely.
Anything else you wanted to share, Sarah, before my house implodes around me?
No, thank you so much for having me. If you haven't read our Best War Stories, please pick it up. It is so wonderful, and I am by no means the best writer in there. There are so many amazing people whose writing is in our Best War Stories, and I encourage you to pick it up.
Bassman 42, Bassman. I don't know that. Is it a fish or is it a music reference? I'm basically your grandma, so I should not be doing Facebook Live, Sarah, because this happens to me every time. Last time I did Facebook Live, somebody had to send me a YouTube of how to use a pop socket. Whoever you are, 42, if you email me, editor@clearancejobs.com, we will send you the physical copy or an ebook version of the book. So thank you for participating in the chat. And thank you for sharing your story, Sarah. And thank you for writing with us at Clearance Jobs. Keep writing, and I might stop saying translate. Maybe. I don't know.
I'll write another piece on where I actually disagree. I agree with the concept, just not with the semantics. So.
The word, I like it. I need challenge my assumptions. This is what we're here for. We like that. Bass guitar, he says. Okay, bass. So it's not a fishing reference.
I don't know. I asked my 10-year-old nephew and my 11-year-old niece to tell me all kinds of stuff these days, because I don't know what's happening.
What are the kids doing these days? That's what I want to know. But anyway, we're reading at Clearance Jobs. So if you have a book that you think we should read, again, we always send free copies of our books out. We want folks reading. We want folks writing and telling their stories like Sarah, but we also want folks who don't write can read. And there's a lot to be learned, a lot of education that can happen, not just on Twitter and Facebook Live, but on reading great books. So pick up Our Best War Stories. And thank you again, Sarah, so much for all of your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks. It's been great. Thanks, Lydia.